Hello everyone and welcome to my B&B Fan Club channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Deacon Sharp stood in the vast lobby, his leather jacket looking out of place next to the polished wood and crystal chandeliers. His hands were deep in his pockets, and his jaw tightened as he processed the shocking news. Taylor Hayes, the woman who had always appeared unbreakable, was battling cancer. And she hadn't informed anyone, not her children, her ex-husband, or even him, the man who had been circling her for months, looking for a chance to prove he wasn't just a passing fancy. How long? Deacon's voice was low, almost growling as he glared at Taylor. She stood by the fireplace, her slim figure silhouetted against the streaming flames. Her blonde hair flowed in gentle waves, but her eyes, those piercing blue eyes that had always exuded quiet strength, were clouded with something he couldn't quite identify. Fear? Shame? Resignation? 6 months, Taylor replied, her voice firm but soft, as if she was attempting to soften the shock. I found out 6 months ago. Stage 3. It's aggressive. Deacon's heart pounded. 6 months. She'd been carrying this alone for half a year, smiling through lunches at Il Giardino, giving him advice on his daughter, Hope, and never revealing that her own body was betraying her. So you didn't thought to tell me? To whom should I tell this? Taylor's lips pinched into a thin line, and she averted her sight to the framed images on the mantel, which depicted her children, Steffi and Thomas, in happier times. I didn't want pity, she explained. I didn't want to be the sick woman everyone avoids. I wanted to continue living, Deacon. To continue being myself. But you're not just you, Deacon responded, his voice rising despite himself. You're Steffi's mother. Thomas's mother. He paused abruptly, the words sticking in his throat. You're someone I care about. He didn't say it, but the unspoken truth hovered between them like a storm cloud. Taylor's gaze softened briefly. I was about to inform you. All of you. I just needed time to figure out how, Deacon said as he paced a few steps. The weight of her seclusion seemed like a betrayal, even though he knew it wasn't fair. Taylor had always been fiercely independent, a lady who handled her burdens gracefully. But this was too much for anyone to handle alone. Rich Forrester sat behind his desk in Forrester Creations' sleek, modern headquarters, his broad shoulders stooped as he stared at a sketch he'd been working on for hours. The lines were incorrect, the proportions were improper, and nothing was coming together. His mind was not on fashion tonight. It was on Taylor. He had suspected something was awry for weeks. She had been distant, her laughing infrequent, and her smiles forced. When he pressed her, she dismissed it, citing stress or exhaustion. But today, when she slumped during a meeting, her face pale and her breathing shallow, the truth hit home. Cancer. The word felt like a knife in his chest. Ridge had driven her to the hospital personally, his hands gripping the wheel so fiercely that his knuckles became white. The physicians had been nice but direct. The cancer had spread, and while therapy was feasible, the journey ahead would be difficult. Taylor had listened calmly, nodding as if they were discussing another person's life. Ridge's heart fell as she urged him not to tell the children. Not yet. I need to do this my way, she murmured, barely audible. Please, Ridge. Let me handle it. He had not argued. How could he? Taylor had always been the one to keep him together when his world came apart. She was his rock, his confidant, and the woman who had loved him despite his darkest errors. And now, confronted with the prospect of losing her, Ridge recognized something he had been too obstinate to accept for years. He still loved her. Deeply. Irrevocably. The door to his office creaked open, and Thomas Forrester entered, his countenance a mix of tiredness and concern. Dad, are you okay? He inquired, his tone apprehensive. Thomas had always been sensitive to his father's moods, which made him both a talented designer and a fragile soul. Ridge looked up, attempting a smile. Yeah, I am fine. Thomas frowned, unconvinced. It is Mom, right? Something is wrong. I saw her today and she seemed vulnerable. Ridge's throat clenched. She is never fragile. He wanted to shelter Thomas, to keep him from knowing the truth for a little longer. But Taylor's secret was too big for him to carry alone. Thomas, he said, his voice shaking, there's something you need to know. Thomas's face crumbled as Ridge talked, the words tumbling out like a dam breaking. Cancer. His mother, the person who had always been his rock, was struggling for her life. And she hadn't informed him. The treachery hurt, but the fear, the bone-deep anxiety of losing her, threatened to ruin him. Why didn't she tell you? Thomas muttered, his voice raw. I am her son. I should have known. Ridge stretched out and touched Thomas's shoulder. She intended to protect you. She loves you, Thomas. More than everything. Thomas drew back, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Protect me? By lying? By letting me think everything was fine while she was. He couldn't complete his statement. The prospect of his mother suffering alone was overwhelming. Back at the mansion, Taylor sat alone in her bedroom, the weight of the day crushing against her. She had sent Deacon away because she couldn't handle the pity in his eyes. She knew he cared about her, perhaps even loved her in his own way, but she couldn't let herself rely on him. Not now. Not when she needed all of her power to face what lay ahead. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand and she checked it, expecting another worrying text from Steffi. But it was Ridge. The message was simple. I'm coming over. We need to talk. Taylor's heart fell. She understood what this was about. Ridge had made his decision years ago, preferring Brooke over her time and again. But now, with her illness looming over them like a dark cloud, she could sense a difference in him. The way he looked at her at the hospital, and how his hand lingered on hers, was different. Love, raw and unguarded, horrified her. When Ridge came, the air between them was heavy with unsaid history. He stood in the doorway, his presence dominating the space. Taylor, he murmured, his voice full of sorrow. I can't lose you. Not now. Never. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. Don't do it, Ridge. You don't need to do this. I'm not your responsibility, he replied, taking a step closer. You are everything. You've always been everything. The words hit her like a tidal wave, piercing the barriers she placed around her heart. For years she convinced herself she was over Ridge, that she could go on, and that she was stronger without him. But now, confronted with her own mortality, she couldn't deny it. She loved him. She always has. They spoke for hours, building a tapestry of sorrow, forgiveness, and optimism. Ridge informed her he was leaving Brooke because he couldn't continue living a lie when his heart was with her. Taylor protested, claiming that he did not need to make such a severe decision, but Ridge was adamant. I choose you, Taylor, he continued, his voice steady. I've always chosen you, even when I was too stupid to see it. As they hugged each other, the outer world went away. For the first time in years, Taylor felt like she was not alone. But the moment was bittersweet because she understood it came with a price. Thomas, meantime, was unraveling. He'd left his father's office in a trance and driven aimlessly across the city until he arrived to the cliffside where he and his mother used to go as children. The waves smashed below, a constant reminder of time's unstoppable march. He remembered his mother's smile, her courage, and how she always believed in him, even when he doubted himself. And now she was fading away, and his father, who had always been a source of both pride and pain, was prioritizing her above all else. Thomas was not furious with his mother. He could never be. What about Ridge? That was different. Ridge's decision to leave Brooke and recommit to Taylor felt like a betrayal, not just to Brooke, but to the family they had all worked so hard to keep together. Thomas had spent years attempting to show himself to his father as the son Ridge could be proud of. And now it felt like Ridge was prioritizing Taylor's condition over him, Steffi, and the life they'd all created. He sat on the cliff's edge, his legs dangling over the edge, and let the tears fall. He cried for his mother because he was afraid of losing her. He sobbed for himself, the youngster who had always sought his father's favor but never thought he had it. And he grieved for the future, which suddenly seemed so unclear. Back at the mansion, Taylor and Ridge were disturbed by the slamming of the front door. Steffi stormed in, her face a mask of rage and misery. Is this true? She demanded, her voice trembling. Are you sick, Mom? And you haven't told me? Taylor's heart ached as she saw her daughter's misery. Steffi, sweetheart, I was going to tell you. Steffi cut her off, tears flowing down her cheeks. When was it too late? When were you gone? How can you conceal this from us? Ridge moved forward to mediate, but Steffi turned against him. And you? You knew but you didn't say anything? You allowed her to lie to us? It wasn't his fault, Taylor answered firmly, despite the tears in her eyes. I made him a promise. This is on me. Steffi shook her head, her rage turning to despair. I cannot lose you, Mom. I can't. Taylor snatched her baby into her arms, sobbing together. Ridge watched, his heart bleeding, knowing there was nothing he could do to change this. Taylor's illness, rather than lies or treachery, tore the family apart. Over the next 2 weeks, the Forresters united behind Taylor. Steffi poured herself into research, talking with doctors and trying every therapeutic option. Thomas, who was still dealing with his own sadness, created a collection in memory of his mother, pouring his emotions into every stitch. Deacon, ever the outsider, found ways to silently encourage Taylor, bringing her favorite coffee, sitting with her throughout chemo sessions, and lending a shoulder when the weight of it all became too much. However, Taylor's illness cast a long shadow over the family, putting an unavoidable pressure on them. Ridge's choice to leave Brooke produced a flurry of drama, with Brooke lashing out in pain and anger. Thomas, torn between his devotion to his mother and his conflicting sentiments for his father, withdrew even farther, his melancholy a constant undercurrent in all interactions. Taylor sat in her yard one evening, covered in a blanket against the October chill, when Thomas joined her. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound being the rustling of leaves in the breeze. I'm sorry, Taylor replied, her voice barely audible, for not telling you, for making you feel like you weren't enough. Thomas shook his head, his gaze set on the horizon. You do not need to apologize, Mom. I wish I could solve this. I wish I could make it go away. Taylor reached for his hand, her grip surprisingly firm. You don't need to fix it, Thomas. Just be here. That's enough. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I love you, Mom. I love you too, she responded, her voice quivering. Always. Taylor's battle persisted as the weeks and months passed. There were good days full of joy and hope and awful days, when the pain and exhaustion felt overwhelming. Throughout it all, the Forresters clung to each other, their love a fragile but unshakable bond. Deacon, Ridge, Steffi, and Thomas, they all had their own grief and concerns, but they carried it together. In quiet moments when the world felt too heavy, Taylor would glance at her family and sense a glimmer of serenity. She had no idea what the future contained, but for now she had this, the affection of the ones who mattered the most. And she believed that was plenty. Deacon remained in the dark light of Il Giardino long after the final table had been removed, a glass of unfinished bourbon gleaming beneath the bar light. He couldn't stop thinking about Taylor's cancer, which she kept hidden. He could not make sense of it. Not Taylor. Not the woman who had spent her life mending others, rescuing them from despair, and guiding them to the light. How could she have gone through something so terrible and devastating and not said a word? He was constantly thinking about Ridge. Every secret, every grief, and every decision came back to him. Ridge, the man Taylor had always loved in that quiet, unwavering manner. And now, after all these years of uncertainty and shifting loyalties, Ridge had chosen her again. But the victory felt empty, even cruel because it came with disease, deception, and pain. Deacon exhaled shakily. He had not intended to overhear. He had merely come to deliver the invoice from the restaurant's most recent catering to Forrester Creations. But when he heard Brooke's shaky voice in the office corridor, "She's unwell, Ridge." Taylor did not want anyone to know. Something inside him froze. The world had transformed. He stood in stillness, unseen, as Ridge's breath caught and the truth shattered through the barrier between them. The event was etched into his memory. Ridge's shoulders sagged, his face broke, and Brooke, proud, stubborn Brooke, stood powerless as he mumbled, "She was dying and I didn't know." Deacon could still feel the weight of those words, and a peculiar sorrow arose in his chest. He cared about Brooke and always would. But something about Taylor's quiet power penetrated his conscience. He couldn't stop feeling betrayed on her behalf. She had suffered her pain alone. Taylor rested nestled against her pillows miles away in a dimly lit bedroom with a view of the Pacific. The sound of the ocean was distant and muffled by the high walls of the cliffside mansion. A scarf lay folded beside her, still smelling slightly of the lavender oil she used to relax before meeting with patients. Her hands trembled as she closed the journal. The entries blurred together now. Medical trips, test findings, and intimate anxieties she could never reveal to her children. She had assumed that the most difficult thing would be keeping it hidden. She was wrong. The most difficult aspect was surviving long enough to face what came next. The door creaked quietly. She didn't look up immediately away. She recognized the voice, the breath, and the energy. Ridge. Hey, document. The old nickname slipped from his lips with such fondness that her eyes burned. She managed a weak, genuine smile. Ridge, she said quietly, you shouldn't be here this late. I should have been here all along. His voice cracked slightly as he approached her bedside. His gaze across her face, the wrinkles smoothed by anguish and resilience. Why haven't you told me? Why, Taylor? Her throat tightened around the truth. There was no response that would not harm him. Because you had enough to deal with, she said softly. You were rebuilding your life with Brooke, the kids, and all I broke years ago. I didn't want pity, Ridge. I didn't want to be another burden. Ridge slid to the edge of the bed and grabbed her hand. You were never a burden. You were and are the center of this family. I should have sensed something was wrong. Tears welled up in her eyes. You could not have. I hid it well. I have to. He rubbed his thumb on her knuckles, rough and soft. You fought this alone. Taylor nodded slowly. Until I couldn't anymore. He exhaled, looking at her with a mix of guilt and admiration. You're the bravest woman I've ever known. In the corridor, unobserved, Thomas slumped against the wall, his breath taken away. His eyes were filled with such intense sorrow that it felt almost physical. He'd come to check on his mother, carrying her favorite tea, ignorant of the impending storm inside. But what he saw, the intimacy, the unsaid love, cut him as nothing else had. For a long time, he wished his parents would reconcile. He'd fantasized about it, manipulated for it, and told himself it was fate. But seeing his mother now, fragile and pale, with his father's hand covering hers, he realized that perhaps destiny was just another term for misery. He moved aside before they could see him, swallowing hard as tears clouded his vision. Downstairs, Steffi paced. When she noticed her brother's expression, she froze. Thomas? What happened? He shook his head and spoke in a husky voice. Dad knows. About Mom. Her hand moved to her mouth. Oh my God. She didn't tell us, Steffi. She did not inform anyone. She was unwell the entire time. And now Dad is picking her. Steffi's brow wrinkled. What do you mean by choosing her? He glanced at her with red-rimmed eyes. He informed her he was staying with her. He's leaving Brooke, Steffi said, her eyes widening. Thomas nodded and let out a sour laugh. After everything. The home seemed smaller now, filled with ghosts and echoes. Ridge sat with Taylor as she fell asleep, her hand firmly linked in his. He couldn't stop staring at her, the way her chest rose and fell, the smallest whisper of strength still battling. Steffi fell into the couch, staring blankly at the flickering fireplace. All she ever wanted was peace, she explained softly. Thomas swallowed as his jaw tightened. And she had to almost die to get it. Days passed like hours, leaving the Forrester mansion in a bizarre limbo. Brooke avoided phone calls. Deacon attempted to contact her, but she blocked him. Ridge alternated between guilt and resolve, confident that this selecting Taylor and supporting her was ultimately the correct thing to do. However, for Taylor, each gesture of love was another stab of guilt. She didn't want him to stay because of obligation or pity. She wanted him to stay because he couldn't imagine living without her. She awoke late one evening to discover Ridge watching her again. You can't keep looking at me like that, she said quietly, her voice low. Like what? Like I'm going to disappear. He leaned in, stroking her hair back. I nearly lost you once. I'm not going to let it happen again. She smiled sadly. You cannot control everything, Ridge. Sometimes love isn't about clinging on. Sometimes it's about letting go. His jaw set. Do not say that. Don't you dare say that. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I just don't want you to regret this. I'll never regret loving you, he responded firmly. Never. Outside her window, the ocean slammed against the cliffs, creating a peaceful yet brutal sound. She closed her eyes and listened to the beat, recalling how many times she had watched those waves and wondered whether love could ever be as consistent. In another part of town, Deacon poured himself another drink. He'd been trying to contact Brooke for days. When she finally arrived at the restaurant, her eyes were swollen and her voice hoarse. "Deacon, I can't do this," she whispered quietly, sitting opposite from him. "What do I do? Be upset with him? Be upset with her? I thought I'd moved on, but now that I know Taylor is sick." Her voice broke. "How could I dislike her for that?" He stretched across the table to take her hand. "You can't detest her. But you can still hurt." Brooke nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He chose her. After everything we've gone through," Deacon's gaze softened. "Maybe it isn't about selecting Brooke. Maybe it's about making peace before it's too late." She glanced up to him, hoping for consolation or permission to stop fighting. "You always see the good in people," she said softly. He grinned slightly. "Not always. But I recognize the truth when it is staring me in the face. Taylor did not steal him from you, Brooke. Life did." Back at the Cliff House, Thomas stood on the balcony, gazing into the darkness. His mother's illness had shattered every notion he held about control, manipulation, and forcing love to happen. He realized how vulnerable everything was. One heartbeat, one secret, one decision could change everything. Steffi joined him and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. "Is she asleep?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah. Dad is with her," Steffi said, her eyes shimmering. "I have never seen him gaze at her like that. Not even when we were kids." Thomas's voice broke. "This isn't fair. She finally gets what she's always wanted, and she might not live long enough to enjoy it." Steffi pinched her lips together, tears welling up. "We just have to believe she will." But they both knew that hope was fleeting. Taylor's condition changed over the weeks and months, with some days bright and others miserable. Ridge remained at her side, stubborn as always, refusing to accept anything except survival. He read to her, cooked for her, and even helped her paint when she was healthy enough to sit by the window.